"Aha! I have caught you," said Sancho. "This is what in my heart and soul I was longing to know. Come now, señor, can you deny what is commonly said around us when a person is out of humor? I don't know what ails so and so, that he neither eats, nor drinks, nor sleeps, nor gives a proper answer to any question. One would think he was enchanted. From which it is to be gathered that those who do not eat or drink or sleep or do any of the natural acts I am speaking of, that such persons are enchanted, but not those that have the desire your worship has, and drink when drink is given them, and eat when there is anything to eat, and answer every question that is asked. What thou sayest is true, Sancho, replied Don Quixote, but I have already told thee there are many sorts of enchantments, and it may be that in the course of time they have been changed one for another, and that now it may be the way with enchanted people to do so. All that I do, though they did not do so before. It is vain to argue or draw inferences against the usage of the time. I know and feel that I am enchanted, and that is enough to ease my conscience, for it would weigh heavily on it if it I thought that I was not enchanted, and that in this faint-hearted and cowardly way I allowed myself to lie in this cage, defrauding multitudes of the succour I might afford to those in need and distress, who, at this very moment, may be in sore want of my aid and protection. Still, for all that, replied Sancho, I say that for your greater and fuller satisfaction, it would be well if your worship were to try and get out of this prison, and I promise to do all in my power to help, and even take you out of it and see if you could once more mount your good Rocinante, who seems to be enchanted too. He is so melancholy and dejected. And then we might try our chance in looking for adventures again. And if we have no luck, there will be time enough to go back to the cage, in which, on the faith of a good and loyal squire, I promise to shut myself up along with your worship, if so be you are so unfortunate, or I so stupid as not to be able to carry out my plan. I am content to do as thou sayest, brother Sancho, said Don Quixote, and when thou seest an opportunity for effecting my release, I will obey thee absolutely. But thou wilt see, Sancho, how mistaken thou art in thy conception of my misfortune. The knight-errant and the ill-errant squire kept up their conversation till they reached the place where the curate, the canon, and the barber, who had already dismounted, were waiting for them. The carter at once unyoked the oxen and left them to roam at large about the pleasant green spot, the freshness of which seemed to invite not enchanted people like Don Quixote, but wide-awake, sensible folk like his squire, who begged the curate to allow his master to leave the cage for a little, for, if they did not let him out, the prison might not be as clean as the propriety of such a gentleman as his master required. The curate understood him, and said he would very gladly comply with his request, only that he feared his master, finding himself at liberty, would take to his old courses, and make off where nobody could ever find him again. I will answer for his not running away, said Sancho, and I will also say, said the canon, and especially if he gives me his word as knight errant not to leave us without our consent. Don Quixote, who was listening to all this, said, I give it. Moreover, one who is enchanted as I am cannot do as he likes with himself, for he who had enchanted him could prevent him from moving one place for 3 ages, and if he attempted to escape would bring him back flying. And that being so, they might as well release him, particularly as it would be to the advantage of all, for if they did not let him go out, he protested he would be unable to avoid offending their nostrils unless they kept their distance. The canon shook his hand, tied together as they both were, and on his word and promise they unbound him, and rejoiced beyond measure he was to find himself out of the cage. The first thing he did was to stretch himself all over, and then he went to where Rocinante was standing, giving him a couple of slaps on the haunches, said, I still trust in God and in his blessed mother, O flower and mirror of steeds, that we shall soon see ourselves, both of us, as we wish to be, thou with thy master on thy back, and I mounted upon thee, following the calling for which God sent me into the world. And so saying, accompanied by Sancho, he withdrew to a retired spot, from which he came back much relieved and more eager than ever to put his squire's scheme into execution. The canon gazed at him, wondering at the extraordinary nature of his madness, and that in all his remarks and replies he should show such an excellent sense, and only lose his stirrups, as he has already been said, when the subject of chivalry was breached. And so moved by compassion, he said to him, as they all sat on the green grass waiting the arrival of the provisions, Is it possible, gentle sir, that the nauseous and idle reading of your books of chivalry can have had such an effect on your worship as to upset your reason, so that you fancy yourself enchanted, and the like? All as far from the truth as falsehood itself is. How can there be any human understanding that can persuade itself there ever was all that infinity of Amadises in the world, or all the multitude of famous knights, all those emperors of Tribuzoid, all beyond, all those Philomartes of Hicanta, all those palfreys, and damsels errant, and serpents, and monsters, and giants, and marvelous adventures, and enchantments of every kind, of battles and prodigious encounters, splendid costumes, lovesick princesses, squires made counts, droll dwarfs, love letters, billions and cooings, swashbuckler women, and, in a word, all that nonsense the books of chivalry contain. For myself, I can only say that when I read them, so long as I do not stop to think that they are all lies and frivolity, they give me a certain amount of pleasure. But when I come to consider what they are, I fling the very best of them at the wall, and would fling it into the fire if there were one on hand, so richly deserving such punishment as cheats and impostors out of the range of ordinary toleration, and as founders of new sects and modes of life, and teachers that lead the ignorant public to believe and account as truth all the folly they contain. And such is their audacity, they even dare to unsettle the wits of gentlemen of birth and intelligence, as is shown plainly by the way they have served your worship, when they have brought you to such a pass that you have to be shut up in a cage and carried on an ox cart, as one would carry a lion or a tiger from place to place to make money by showing it. Come, Senor Don Quixote, have some compassion for yourself, return to the bosom of common sense, and make use of liberal share of it that heaven has pleased to bestow upon you, but employing your abundant gifts of mind in some other reading that may serve benefit to your conscience and add to your honor. And if still led away by your natural bent, you desire to read books of achievements and of chivalry, read the book of Judges of the Holy Scriptures, for there you will find grand reality, and deeds as true as they are heroic. Lusitania and Veralis, Rome as a Caesar, Carthage a Hannibal, Greece an Alexander, Castile a Count Fernand Gonzalez, Valencia a Cid, Andalusia a Gonzalo Fernandez, Estramunda a Diego Garcia de Padres, Jerez a Ricci, Manuel de Leon, to read those whose valiant deeds will entertain and instruct the loftiest minds, and still fill with delight and wonder. Here, Senor Don Quixote, will be reading worthy of your sound understanding, from which you will rise learned in history, and love with virtue, strengthened in goodness, improved in manners, brave without rashness, prudent without cowardice, and all the honor of God, your own adventure and glory of La Mancha, whence I am informed your worship derives your birth. Don Quixote listened with the greatest attention to the canon's word, and when he found he had finished, after regarding him for some time, he replied to him, "It appears to me, gentle sir, that your worship's discourse is intended to persuade me that there never were any knights errant in the world, and that all the books of chivalry are false, lying, mischievous, and useless to this date, and that I have done wrong in reading them, and worse in believing them, and still worse in imitating them, and I undertook to follow the arduous calling of knight errantry, which they set forth. For you deny that there ever were Amadeuses of Gaul or Greece or any other of the knights whom the books are full." "It is all exactly as you state it," said the canon. To which Don Quixote returned, "You also went on to say that books of this kind had done me much harm, inasmuch as they had upset my senses and shut me up in a cage, and that it would be better for me to reform and change my studies, and read other truer books, which would afford more pleasure and instruction." "Just so," said the canon. "Well, then," returned Don Quixote, "to my mind it is you who are the one that is out of his wits and enchanted, as you have ventured to utter such blasphemies against a thing so universally acknowledged and accepted as true, that whoever denies it, as you do, deserves the same punishment which you say you inflict on the books that irritate you when you read them. For try to persuade anybody that Amadeus and all the other knights adventurers with whom the books are filled never existed, would be like trying to persuade him that the sun does not yield light, or ice cold, or earth nourishment. What wit in the world can persuade another that the story of Princess de Floripes and Guy of Burgundy is not true, or that of Fierabras and the bridge of Mantible, which happened in the time of Charlemagne? For by all that is good, it is as true as that it is daylight now, and if it be a lie, it must be a lie too, that there was a Hector, or Achilles, or Trojan War, or 12 peers of France, or Arthur of England, who still lives, changed into a raven, that is unceasingly looked for in his kingdom. One might just as well try to make out that the history of Garindo Mesquino, or of the Holy Grail, is false, or that the lowest of Tristram and the Queen Iseult are apocryphal, as well as those of Guinevere and Lancelot, when there are persons who can almost remember having seen Dame Quintitona, who is the best cupbearer in Great Britain. And so true is this, that I recollect a grandmother of mine on the father's side, whenever she saw any dame in a venerable hood, used to say to me, "Grandson, that one is like Dame Quintatona," from which I concluded that she must have known her, or at least had managed to see some portrait of her. Then who can deny that the story of Piraeus and the fair Maglona is true, even when to this day may be seen in the king's armory house horse he rode through the air, and is a trifle bigger than that of a pole cart, and alongside of the pin is Babica's saddle, and Roncesvalles there is Roland's horn, and as large as a large beam, whence we may infer that there are 12 peers in the Pierres and the Cid, and other knights like them, of the sort of people commonly called adventurers. Or perhaps I shall be told too that there was no such knight errant as the valiant Lusitania Juan de Marillo, who went to Burgundy, and in the city of Arras fought with him the famous lord of Charny, Moses Pires by name, and afterward in the city of Basel with Mosen Enrique de Ramston, coming out of both encounters covered with fame and honor, or adventures and adventure challenges achieved and delivered, also in Burgundy by the valiant Spaniard Pedro Barbara and Guiteria Quixada, whose family I come in the direct male line, when they vanquished the sons of the Count of San Paulo. I shall be told, too, that Don Fernando de Guerva did not go in quest of adventures to Germany, where he engaged in combat with Meister George, a knight of the house of the Duke of Austria. I shall be told that the jousts of Soro de Quinas, him of the Paso, and Emprise of Mosen Luis de Falcas against the Castilian knight, and Don Gonzo de Guzman were mockeries, as well as many other achievements of Christian knights of these and foreign realms, which are so authentic and true, that I repeat, he who denies them must be totally wanting in reason and good sense. The canon was amazed to hear the medley of truth and fiction Don Quixote uttered, and to see how well acquainted he was with everything related to or belonging to the achievements of his knight errantry. So he said in reply, "I cannot deny, Señor Don Quixote, that there is some truth in what you say, especially in regards to the Spanish knights errant, and I am willing to grant, too, that the 12 peers of France existed, and I am not disposed to believe that they did all the things that the Archbishop Turpin relates of them, for the truth of the matter is they were knights chosen by the kings of France and called peers because they were all equal in worth, rank, and prowess. At least they were not; they ought to have been. And it was a kind of religious order like those of Santiago and Calatrava in the present day, in which it is assumed that those who take it are valiant knights of distinction and of good birth, and just as we say now a knight of St. John or Alcatrana, they used to say then equal then a knight of the 12 peers, because 12 equals were chosen for the military order, that there was a Cid as well as a Bernardo de Carpio. There can be no doubt but that they did the deeds people say they did. I hold to be very doubtful. In the other matter of the pin of Count Pires that you speak of, I say is near Babica's saddle in the armory. I confess my sin, for I am neither either so stupid or so short-sighted that though I have seen the saddle, I have never been able to see the pin, in spite of it being as big as your worship says it is. For all that it is there, without any manner of doubt, said Don Quixote, and more by token, they say, it is enclosed in a sheath of cowhide to keep it from rusting. All that may be, replied the canon, but by the orders I have received, I do not remember seeing it. However, granting it is there, that is no reason why I am bound to believe the stories of all those of Amadeus and all those multitude of knights that they tell us about, nor is it reasonable that a man like your worship, so worthy and with so many good qualities, and endowed with such good understanding, should allow himself to be persuaded that such wild and crazy things are written as are written in the books of those absurd books of chivalry are really true.